It was the kind of morning that felt unfinished, the sky smeared in dull gray, the sun still deciding whether to rise or retreat. A thin wind pulled at coat sleeves and tossed yesterday's leaves in lazy spirals across the cracked sidewalk. The air had that faint smell of dew on concrete, metal, and early brewed coffee drifting from corner windows. At the end of the block, an old city bus hissed to a halt, brakes sighing, doors wheezing open, and the Thursday routine began. Commuters shuffled forward. A teenager with earbuds, a mother adjusting her child's backpack, two men in worn work boots trading silence over paper cups of diner coffee. All heads down, all motions practiced. Further down the block, Franklin Doyle approached the stop with the deliberate rhythm of someone who'd learned to measure his steps against time and pain. He walked upright, but each stride bore the burden of his 88 years, the kind of years you don't count with candles, but with surgeries, names buried, and the things you never got around to saying. His coat was dark wool, neatly brushed, the kind once issued long ago in another life. His shoes were polished to a patient shine. Pinned to the side of his cap were two modest rows of faded insignias. Nothing flamboyant, nothing for show. But for those who knew, they spoke loudly. Wa'ahai, medic. Field promotion, 1 bronze star, no Purple Heart, he never applied. In his hand was a canvas satchel, the kind that frays at the corners and softens over decades. Inside it, a folded newspaper, a bundle of flowers wrapped in wax paper, and a photograph protected in plastic. Worn, but not forgotten. Franklin didn't speak as he joined the line. He nodded once to the older man ahead of him, and again to the child who looked up at his cane with quiet curiosity. He came here every Thursday, took the 7:45 bus heading east, got off 5 stops later at a modest cemetery tucked between a high school and an old furniture store. There, beneath a cedar tree, rested his younger brother Joseph, killed in France, 1944. Franklin never missed a week. The bus pulled up late, 2 minutes behind schedule. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a city-issued jacket, was new. His name tag read Jerry, but his expression spoke volumes more than his name. He looked harried, annoyed, chewing a toothpick with the weary anger of a man already done with his day before it had begun. The front of the line began to board. Franklin stepped forward slowly, letting others go first, as he always did. When it was his turn, he moved to the open door, careful, deliberate, lifting 1 foot to the first step. Jerry leaned over from the driver's seat, face twisted in irritation. "For God's sake," he muttered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Can't hold up the whole damn route for another hobbling antique." The words dropped like lead. There was a pause, quick, sharp, like air sucked from a room just before the fire starts. Franklin didn't move. He looked up at the driver, eyes steady, tired, unblinking. Then back at the steps. A woman near the front, younger, maybe early 30s, long dark hair in a braid, turned her head, shocked. Jerry leaned further, waving a dismissive hand. "If you can't climb stairs, you should be on one of those vans. You know, the ones for people with needs." The word hung, thick with contempt. Franklin's grip tightened on the cane, but he didn't raise his voice, didn't plead. He simply stepped back, slow and controlled, like a man refusing to be shoved twice. The bus remained still. Engines humming, doors yawning open like a mouth too wide. The woman, Rena, as we'll come to know her, stared at Franklin, at the cane, at the medals, at the quiet that followed the insult. Nobody moved, but something had begun to stir, not in volume, not in action, just a shift, a crack, the kind that always comes before something much bigger breaks open. The doors of the bus remained open, but no one moved. Rena held her breath, unsure why. She wasn't prone to conflict. A 3rd-grade teacher by trade, she dealt with tantrums, forgotten lunchboxes, and scraped knees. Not this, but something about the way the old man had stepped back, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but out of dignity. It had struck something deep and aching. She looked at Jerry. He was checking his mirrors, pretending not to notice the discomfort soaking into the aisle. His fingers tapped impatiently against the steering wheel. Behind him, the hum of the engine grew louder, like it too was impatient to move on. "Come on, people," Jerry barked. "Clock's running." Still no one spoke. Franklin adjusted the strap on his satchel, eyes fixed on the concrete. Not ashamed, just weathered, like a man who'd been here before. Maybe not on a bus, maybe not in public, but in the quiet space between being needed and being tolerated. A young man near the back pulled out his phone. He wasn't filming yet, just hovering. His eyes flicked between Franklin and Jerry, then back again, waiting. An older woman clutched her purse tighter, lips pressed thin. Her gaze lingered on the medals pinned to Franklin's cap. One of them, a small, worn cross, she recognized from her father's uniform long ago. From the second row, a man in his 60s, strong hands, high visibility jacket, probably Union, stood halfway up, blocking the aisle. He didn't speak to Jerry. He looked at Franklin. "You getting on, sir?" Franklin raised his eyes. They were pale, clear, but tired. "I don't want to be a problem," he said. "He's got a schedule." The man shook his head. "If this bus don't have room for you, then it don't have room for the rest of us either." A ripple moved through the passengers. Jerry slammed his palm on the wheel. "You've got to be kidding me." "No," Rena said softly, standing now. It wasn't loud, but it landed. "We're not." Jerry glared into the mirror, eyes darting between the faces looking back at him. Not with anger, but with disappointment. The kind of look that says, "We see you now, and we won't forget." He muttered something under his breath, inaudible, and reached for the door switch again. But before he could press it, the man in the high-vis jacket turned to the others. "We're gonna get him on this bus," he said. "You with me?" One by one, heads nodded. A teenage boy rose, slipped his earbuds out, and stepped into the aisle. A woman near the middle put down her knitting. Even the man with the phone, who'd finally hit record, lowered it and stepped forward. And Franklin? He stood perfectly still. A crease had formed between his brows, not of confusion but of memory. He had seen this before, not in a bus, but in a city torn apart by something far worse. And something in his eyes whispered, "It's happening again." It had been 3 days since the shelling began. The city, once filled with red brick houses, bakeries, small squares with children's laughter, was now a husk. Shattered glass clung to window frames like torn lace. Shutters swung in the cold wind, creaking with a rhythm that felt like breath held too long. Franklin crawled through the debris, boots shredded, knees slick with blood that wasn't all his. The smell was unforgettable, wet stone, cordite, and the sharp, iron stink of open wounds. Smoke hung low, curling in the air like ghosts. A church bell lay cracked in the street, its silence louder than any gunfire. He was 20. His breath burned in his throat. His hands shook as he reached for the crumbling wall, using it to drag himself forward. Beneath him, the ground wasn't ground anymore. It was broken staircases, scorched books, and shattered toys. "Frank," the voice was barely a whisper. Franklin turned, heart in his mouth. There, half buried beneath the rubble of a collapsed balcony, was Anderson, his squad mate, his friend. The man who had given him cigarettes, shared stories of home, of a baby girl waiting to be born back in Michigan. Blood seeped through Anderson's side, dark and pulsing. His leg bent wrong beneath twisted steel. One eye was swollen shut. The other clung to Franklin like a lifeline. "She's due next month," Anderson rasped. Her name's gonna be Lila." Franklin dropped beside him, hands moving before thought could catch up. He pressed his palm to the wound, searching for gauze in the pouch slung over his shoulder. His fingers were numb. His heart thundered. "I've got you, Anderson. Stay with me." Anderson gritted his teeth. "Don't leave me." "I won't." The words weren't a promise. They were a command, not to Anderson, but to the world itself. Franklin worked fast. Too fast. Every second was stolen. He tied a strip of shirt around Anderson's torso, dug with bare fingers to clear the debris trapping the man's leg. His own knuckles split open. He didn't stop. Gunfire cracked a block away. He could hear boots, voices, but none of it mattered. There was only this man, this moment. "You're not dying in a pile of bricks," Franklin muttered. "Not here, not like this." And somehow, inch by inch, he pulled Anderson free, half dragged, half carried, through a building's shattered entryway, across a street blackened by fire, into what had once been a school but now held only echoes. They collapsed behind a stone column. Anderson's pulse was faint. His lips were blue, but his hand still held Franklin's. "You tell her," he murmured. Franklin leaned in, forehead against Anderson's. "You'll tell her yourself. Now." The bus smelled like vinyl and wet jackets. Franklin blinked slowly. The present settled back in around him. But the image of Anderson, crushed beneath rubble, eyes wild with love and terror, lingered behind his eyes like smoke in a lung. He stood straighter, though his back ached. He looked at the steps of the bus like a battlefield, because today it wasn't about him. It was about remembering the ones who never got the chance to be old. The steps of the bus no longer looked mechanical. They looked like a wall. Franklin stood at the base of them, his cane planted firm against the concrete, his eyes steady. Around him, silence still held, but now it vibrated, charged with something gathering weight behind the stillness. Rena stepped forward first. She was shaking, just slightly, but not from fear, from certainty. "Sir," she said softly, "would you let me help you on?" Franklin turned, surprised, but not startled. He studied her, her expression, her hands open, unarmed, and nodded once. Then came the second figure. The man in the high-visibility jacket moved to Franklin's other side without a word. One hand reached beneath his elbow, the other steadying his satchel. Not clumsy, not overbearing, just solid, like a post driven into the earth. A third passenger came, the teen with the earbuds, his phone tucked into his pocket now. He said nothing, but lifted the cane gently and held it like a baton passed between generations. Then another, the woman with the knitting, rose and helped guide the satchel into the stairwell. Her eyes shimmered behind her glasses. She whispered something, inaudible, and crossed herself. And in that moment, the strangers became one body. They moved in quiet coordination, hands beneath Franklin's arms and shoulders, guiding him not like a fragile thing, but like a symbol. One step, then another. Franklin didn't tremble, not with fear, but with something else, something that felt too big for his bones. A lifetime of silence cracking gently open. As they reached the top step, the bus rocked slightly beneath them. The hush inside was no longer awkward. It was solemn. Dozens of eyes turned, not just to watch, but to witness. Jerry sat behind the wheel, jaw tight, face red with a shame he could no longer disguise. He reached for the door switch, but no one gave him permission to move. The bus didn't belong to him anymore. Franklin was lowered into the second seat behind the driver. His satchel was placed in his lap. The cane was returned, positioned gently by his right side. He looked up at the people around him, lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came. Rena placed her hand on the seatback before him. "You okay, sir?" Franklin nodded. His voice was soft, hoarse from decades of holding things in. "I was just remembering someone who never made it to this age." She smiled, warm, but pained. "Then I'm glad you did." A passenger in the back whispered, "Play it." And from someone's phone, a soft, solemn version of "Taps" drifted down the aisle. Not loud, just enough. Jerry froze. Franklin closed his eyes, and every seat on that bus felt a little more full than it had moments before. The last note of "Taps" faded into silence like a breath exhaled after a prayer. No one moved. No one dared. The bus, which moments ago had been a vessel of impatience, of routine, had become something else. It was no longer just a vehicle. It was a room of memory, a place of quiet reparation. Franklin sat with his back straight, the photo of Anderson now in his lap. He hadn't intended to show it. Not today. Maybe not ever. But something in him knew. This moment belonged to more than just him. He turned it gently, facing it toward Rena. She looked down. In the faded image, 2 young soldiers sat on the steps of a building, laughing. One of them with his boot off, the other holding a helmet between his knees. The street behind them was rubble, but they looked like brothers. "My friend," Franklin said. "Anderson. We pulled him from a building that wasn't a building anymore. Said he'd name his daughter Lila. I don't know if he ever got to meet her." Rena blinked. Her voice cracked like porcelain. "You never found out?" He shook his head. "I didn't even know if he made it, until I saw his name on a stone wall in Washington. She'd left flowers there. Said she comes every year. I missed her by 3 days." The boy behind them, the teen who had carried the cane, leaned forward. "What did he say when you pulled him out?" Franklin didn't smile, but his eyes did. "He asked me if it hurt. I told him, only when I remembered." The boy looked away, swallowing hard. At the front, Jerry stared straight ahead. His hands were frozen on the wheel. He looked not at Franklin, but at the reflection of himself in the plexiglass. He didn't apologize, but he didn't speak again either, and that was something. The passengers sat in silence for a long moment, not because they didn't know what to say, but because they finally knew words weren't enough. At the next stop, an elderly woman climbed aboard and paused, her hand on the railing. Her eyes scanned the seats. Then she saw Franklin. She didn't know him, but she recognized him. She lowered her umbrella. She placed her hand over her heart, and she nodded. Franklin returned the gesture, gentle, solemn, and the world moved forward again, not out of habit, but in honor. The bus rolled on. It no longer felt like a ride through the city. It felt like something else, like the closing pages of a story you didn't know you needed to read. Franklin watched the neighborhoods pass. The diner on 8th where the same men played cards every Friday. The school with the chipped mural of eagles. The hardware store with the faded flag in its window. Everything looked the same, but something in him had shifted. He felt it in his hands, the ones that had once trembled over Anderson's shattered chest. He felt it in the silence that no longer felt empty, but full, of eyes that had seen him, heard him, carried him. He reached into his satchel and withdrew the bundle of flowers. Small white chrysanthemums, wrapped in wax paper. The edges were curled, browned slightly by the chill of the morning. He traced the stems with his thumb. "This one's for you, Joe," he whispered. Then, as if summoned, Anderson's face flickered in his mind. Younger, smiling, always calling Franklin Doc, even when he wasn't yet certified to wear the title. Always talking about that baby girl, her first word, her first steps, how she was going to love the snow just like he did. Franklin had kept her name in his chest like a matchstick that never lit. Lila. He wondered where she was now, if she ever got his letters, if she ever read the ones he wrote and never sent. He leaned his head against the window as the bus turned onto the final stretch before the cemetery. Behind him, Rena sat still, not interrupting, not asking questions, just present. Mateo in spirit, if not in name. Franklin exhaled, not tired, but released. He looked down at the cane beside him. The photograph in his coat, the medals that no longer needed explanation. Then he whispered again, just for himself. I remembered. I never forgot. The next Thursday, the bus arrived on time. Franklin stood at the curb again, coat buttoned, satchel in hand. The same wool cap rested neatly on his head, medals glinting in the angled morning light. The flowers in his bag were fresh white tulips this time, their stems wrapped in careful paper. But something was different now. This time, the bus door opened before he reached it, and the driver wasn't Jerry. It was a woman, mid-40s, dark hair tucked under a cap, expression calm and kind. "Mr. Doyle?" she asked as he stepped forward. Franklin paused. "Yes?" She smiled. Not big, not performative, just real. "I was told to expect you." She extended a hand to steady his step, though he didn't need it. "I have your seat ready. Left side, second row, window." He nodded. Appreciated. The bus was quiet as he boarded, but it wasn't awkward anymore. The passengers didn't avert their eyes. They looked up. They nodded. Some smiled. Not one looked away. And in the second row, where Franklin sat each week, a small laminated sign had been affixed to the window beside the seat. In simple typeface, clean and unfussy, it read, "Reserved Thursdays for Mr. Doyle, decorated medic, quiet hero, always remembered." Franklin ran his fingers over it once, gently, like tracing an old name on a stone. He sat, the satchel in his lap, the cane against his knee. When the bus pulled away, he watched the streetlights flicker past. Then the rows of brownstones. Then the quiet corner where he and Anderson had once taken cover. Now, just another coffee shop. He closed his eyes. Just for a second. 3 rows back, Rena sat quietly with a reusable coffee cup. She came now every Thursday too. Not by design, but by ritual. She had started bringing blank note cards in her bag. Sometimes she wrote down things she'd overhear. Sometimes she just sat and remembered. At the Veterans Center, 2 blocks off the 5th Street route, she had begun reading aloud short quotes from journals and letters, her students' words mostly, written after she had told them the story of a man who had once been carried onto a city bus by strangers who refused to sit back and let silence win. Mateo, the teen from that morning, had visited the center twice. The first time, he just listened. The second, he came back with his grandfather's dog tags. He didn't speak for the first hour. Then he said, quietly, "I think I'm ready to ask about him now." And Jerry? He was reassigned. No dramatic firing, no confrontation. Just removed from that route. A quiet change. The kind that happens when enough people see something and decide not to forget it. The footage from that morning had circulated quietly among city employees. Not as viral content, but as training. It wasn't labeled disrespect, it was labeled correction, and that too was a kind of justice. The cemetery welcomed Franklin that afternoon beneath tall cypress trees swaying in the wind. He knelt at the stone, placed the flowers just so, and whispered 2 names. "Joseph, Anderson." He leaned forward. "And Lila, if you're out there, he never forgot you, and neither did I." Back on the bench near the entrance, someone had left a folded note in a sandwich bag, weighted by a small stone. Franklin picked it up, opened it with slow hands. "I don't know your story, but today I saw the world stop for you. Thank you for carrying others, so we could all stand a little taller." There was no signature. He folded it gently and slipped it into his coat pocket, beside the photograph, beside the letters that never reached Michigan. And as the wind moved through the trees, it didn't sound like silence anymore. It sounded like remembrance. Dignity doesn't demand, it endures. Sometimes, the deepest respect isn't spoken, it's carried. And sometimes, it's carried by strangers. Today, we remember. Always forward. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of a kind of strength the world often overlooks, like this video to help keep the quiet courage of men like Franklin alive in our collective memory. Let us know where you're watching from, and whether moments like this have ever made you pause. Subscribe for more true stories that restore dignity, kindness, and honor to the places we often forget to look. Because sometimes, the best way to thank someone is to keep listening. Click the next story now, and walk with us through another chapter of courage remembered.